Okay. I assume we just get started and I'll provide a little intro just so we keep ourselves on schedule. So nice to see you all. And my name is Troy Carter. I'm the CEO and founder at Earthshot, and we have some really expert folks to talk about how to develop a carbon project. And one of the reasons we wanted to host this webinar versus, we've done these sort of technical deep dives on things like leakage and, like v very niche topics is, when I was first starting in this field, I basically didn't have really any context for even how to go. Like it's sort of like I heard of like, oh, carbon markets. If I do a reforestation or conservation project, that is a way to get paid for those activities. But I didn't really know how to like what are the actual steps? Like what do you actually need to do? Who do you need to hire? What is the sort of expertise you need? And so what ended up happening was that I lost a lot of agency through that process. There were other consultancies and brokers and companies that were sort of like, hey, we'll partner with you on this. We'll just take a credit share here or pay a couple $100,000 here. And so the economics of the project pretty radically changed. The sort of communities that we were representing on the ground ended up with not as much money as they could if we knew more about the process from the beginning. And so that's one of the intentions for this is just to provide a broader frame of reference for here's what you need to do. It's not all the technical deep dive on each area, but here's the broad overview of what you need to do. Who are the different parties you can engage with, from technical consultancies to brokers to project finance institutions or big companies for offtake agreements? Like, what is the team you need to assemble to actually get a successful carbon project off the ground? And hopefully through that process, actually do a better job in restoring and protecting the, ecological systems where you are, and then also serving, the communities they are part of. So that's really part of the intention of this. And so as part of this, just a little bit about Earthshot. So we essentially develop and finance nature projects. So these are reforestation, conservation, IFM, agroforestry projects around the world. We've worked on more than 60 projects, 30 different countries, and also structured project finance deals. So last year we did something like $65 million of deals and partnered with some really great organizations, a lot of different NGOs, governments, and big companies that actually end up buying those credits. Um, so just through that process, the team has gotten quite a bit of experience over the last 5 years, but then also most of the team members have actually been in this a lot longer. So maybe Ceci and Annika, you want to just give a brief overview on yourselves, and if you don't feel comfortable, I can fluff your backgrounds a little bit. But maybe Ceci, you start, and I can see if there's something I want to add. Just to be like,
Yeah,
these are real experts in the field and they've seen a lot of projects, so you should take them seriously.
yeah, happy to just do a quick intro. My name is Cecilia Simon. I'm originally from Mexico, currently living in the US, but I've been working in the carbon market for quite a long time. Um, and my background is more on the rules and requirements for how to take a project from beginning to end, following different standards and methodologies. So I've worked with the Climate Action Reserve. I worked with Vera and with Earthshot for the past 3 years, actually supporting a lot of projects. So hopefully this webinar can open a new horizons for you and help you. Really, this is the big purpose of this. Like Troy said, it's like it is so much that you have to consider in a project. So maybe dividing it in 10 steps, it's an easier way to figure it out. So I'll pass it to Annika.
Hi there, my name is Annika Stacone, and I'm a scientist by training. So my background is coming from a PhD in forest ecology, studying early ecosystem development. Um, After that, I spent some time working with natural risk modeling and developing geospatial platforms. And so at Earthshot, my work has spanned both sides, science and the platform side. I'm always excited to bring together what we can do sort of from the quantitative scientific modeling side and turn that into platform software that can be really easily accessible.
Yeah, I already gave a brief intro on myself at the beginning, but just a reminder, my name is Troy. I'm the CEO and founder at Earthshot. And maybe just one last sort of message before we jump in and actually get to the actual meat of the presentation. But basically, this is to serve you. Like we're part of a shared mission. I think everyone, you know, attending this webinar is like, hey, we're here to restore and protect nature. We're here to serve the communities that we are part of and affect climate action and ecological action at scale. And we all sort of all operate at different, you know, places in the chain of things that has to go right. And right now, honestly, I would say is a pretty hard time, not just in carbon markets, but in just the way that nature is perceived, the way that climate action is perceived. And so, you know, there's these long cycles of, you know, a few years ago, hey, this seemed to be a really, really robust, oh, absolutely, carbon markets are going to be the answer to climate change, and we're going to implement them at scale. And now I would say that nature largely has taken a backseat in political discourse. It's just sort of like, no, 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 it's about energy independence or American dynamism or, you know, security threat. And so it's also just a moment like, let's just go take an hour together to recognize who is on this call and also to come together. Like, if this is a viable financing mechanism to achieve a very, very, very large mission that we've all set out to do. Like, the name Earthshot is not that, hey, we are going to go and reforest 1 billion hectares of land or that we are going to achieve this individually. It's really about, hey, we need to catalyze a network of tens of thousands of individual organizations, you know, thousands or millions of people participating in projects. And that is how this change happens. And hopefully we can do a small part in building the infrastructure to make that easier for people. So that's really the intention of this. So maybe I'll kick it off to Ceci, who can just provide some overview and then dial in a few of these steps.
Yeah, thank you, Troy. So what we're trying to do here is, as Troy mentioned, we have a lot of experience developing carbon projects. We have a lot of lessons learned. And it's a constant changing environment. So the standards change, the methodologies change. So what we're trying to portray in this webinar is like a simplified version on how you need to develop a carbon project. So even though we divided this into 10 steps, really they are not discrete steps. We made this for simplicity, but all of these are usually interrelated and there's a lot of feedback loops between this. But we're trying to keep it as simple as possible and provide some of our experience and our lessons that we've gathered throughout time. So these are the 10 steps, and I'm going to dive into all of them, each one of them in this presentation. So can you go for the next? So let's dive into it. And the way I wanted to start this presentation is like the first thing that you need to do when you're developing a project is like really think about the big picture. It's like, what am I trying to achieve? And when we're talking about nature-based solutions, that usually goes beyond carbon, right? Like the main objective might be I'm going to use carbon finance to do a reforestation project or a restoration and conservation. But usually those goals go beyond that. And, maybe you want to improve the livelihoods of the communities. Maybe you want to protect a species. You want to increase ecosystem services. So in most cases, in most of the projects that we work with, carbon is just one of the objectives, and it's usually a means to something bigger. And so the first step that we would recommend is like, think about that. What is it that I want? And so we've divided this into three big buckets, like a planning phase, an implementation phase, and a certification phase. And I'm going to divide each one of these into different steps. So the planning stage is where you go to the drawing board and you say, okay, what do I want for this project and what is it going to look like? So it's like the design phase. And here, this is a little bit like first you do scoping, then you do feasibility, then you do your project design. Project finance, we put it here, but it can really be at any stage of the project development. But we put it here because it's usually what part of your planning process, where am I going to get finance from? Um, does this mean that all the projects need to go through all these four steps? No, some projects might don't need to do a scoping. They might be more advanced and then they can do feasibility straight away. But I'm going to talk a little bit of all of them. The next one. So what is scoping? So we see a lot of projects that come to us and say, hey, I work in this region. I kind of want to do a project here, but I don't know where or what are the polygons that I need to look at. Or they come and say, we have 20 polygons, 20 areas, but we don't know where the carbon is better. Is this going to be a feasible project? So during the scoping phase, it should be a quick, you should not spend a lot of resources in this stage. It's like, what could be my geographic boundaries of a project? And then you start thinking a little bit deeper, like what are the ecosystems that I'm working in and what is the project that I'm trying to do? Is it an avoided deforestation project? Is it a reforestation project? It's not the same like when we work in Cambodia in a deciduous forest than when we work in Brazil in the Amazon rainforest. Like you really need to understand a little bit of the conditions of the landscape. And then you kind of want to know a little bit here if there is potential for emission reductions or removals. Can you generate some credits out of this? So scoping can be done many different ways. At Earthshot, we have a platform and we're going to show you a little bit how it works for this first scoping phase. And I'm going to pass it to Annika to guide us through that.
Great. So I'm going to demo LandOS, which is our platform. And as Ceci said, it's one of the ways that you can do scoping. So when you come in, you land on the project portfolio, and let's add a demo project here. So fill in the name, partner organization, what country it's located in, and when the project start year is. And that will create a new project in our database. Here you can quickly upload or also draw your own polygon. So if you're just exploring a landscape, you can draw a representative area. Here I'm going to upload a specific polygon. So we'll upload that here. Once your area is defined, the background data layers become available. So this helps you see everything from land cover to climate and potential biomass data. This helps you explore the context of your site. So this map catalog includes time series and it's fully customizable. So here you can see customizing the map catalog. And we can look at these different data sets. So this is the potential biomass of the site, looking at the carbon it could hold fully restored. Here we're displaying a canopy height model to see what the existing biomass looks like on the landscape. We can also look here at some climate data. These are important drivers of the biomass accumulation rate. We have some data set like crop yield and livestock yield to help understand what the leakage discount might be. So the goal here is really just to understand the land base that you're looking at. Now we'll go into the analysis part. Here's where we're actually going to do the quantitative analysis on the land base. So we're running Terra Vista, which is our ARR reforestation scoping model. In this case, we're modeling the growth of a closed canopy secondary forest. And there are two important pieces that we look at here. Is there eligible land that would be eligible under carbon methodology rules? And is there the potential to generate credits? So estimating how many credits would be generated. This is a high level estimate and it's just a first step. Here we're showing adding the widgets, which are the different components of the report that we create. This is something that's fully customizable so that you can focus on the insights that are important for your project area. This part we're showing the land eligibility. So this is checking the rules that there hasn't been deforestation within the last 10 years. And we use our own custom land use land cover model to do this. You can adjust the widgets and create the output that you need. And then we get into the native reforestation credit estimates. Here we provide a few scenarios. So we have our polygon specific growth curve, and then we have some different discounts, both assuming that there's crop or livestock activity in the baseline, and then different assumptions about whether you can mitigate all or none of your leakage. And so this will give us a range of outcomes. And then this will give you a sense of what are the possible futures for a project in this area. So here what you can see are best case and conservative case projections for credits with some default assumptions for the discounts. We're showing here some of the quantitative results. So we present the outputs in different formats depending what you need for your report. And here we're showing some of the contextual information. So exploring what the ecozone is, what the IPCC default removal rates would be for this area. It's important to remember this is just the first step. So every carbon project requires some detailed customized work. LandOS can get you started quickly. We originally built it in-house and found it really valuable ourselves, and we hope that it can help other projects speed up the early stages. I'll pass it back to you, Ceci.
Thank you. And just to add, it's like you don't need to know a lot if you use LandOS, like it does it for you, which is really cool when you're just starting to develop a project and you're trying to figure things out, and there's all these terms and all these requirements in the methodology. So having it already embedded there can be very helpful. So you don't have to hire paid for consultants at that stage. Now, moving to number two is feasibility. So once you think, okay, there's a potential project, you do a feasibility assessment. And what we basically do in the feasibility is we assess if there's a risk that the project cannot be developed. And we look at many different things. And there's many different ways on how you can do a feasibility study. Like I said, we base it on risk and red flags, like what would, detain a project. And we look at different aspects of a project. So as you might already know, there's so much more than just the greenhouse gas accounting. Like you can do really good numbers on how many credits, but there's so many other factors that can impact a project. So we, at this stage, we really need to look at the legal and policy situation of your project. Like what is the land tenure? Who has the carbon rights? Are regulatory frameworks clear in the country that you operate in? You might find out that the government doesn't allow for carbon projects like in Indonesia right now, or maybe you realize that, oh my God, it's a red project, so the carbon rights aren't clear, like that's the case in Mexico. And here we are adding also a little bit of an understanding of where the country is heading with the carbon. Is there an emission trading system that I need to be aware of? What is the status of the Paris Agreement and Article 6? How is the country seeing those things? Do I need a government authorization? And you're not going to answer all those questions at this stage, but just you need to identify if there are any red flags that would make your project not feasible. Then we look at certification risk, and this basically means that we look at additionality and baseline. Like, is the project really additional? For example, if there's natural regeneration happening in the project, it might be hard to demonstrate additionality, like what additional activities do I have to implement? Maybe it's just fencing the area and that would make it additional. So here we look at what cannot work from a carbon methodology or standard perspective. Is my project eligible on the methodology? Is there a methodology that I can use, right? Maybe my project wants to reduce fire intensity, and maybe there's not a methodology for that yet. Um, so we also look at potential risks on the credits itself. So we look at, is there going to be leakage? And for those of you who are very new, leakage means that I'm creating some emission reductions in this area, but something else is happening outside. So for example, if I have cattle in my land and I'm going to remove the cattle, where's that cattle going to go? So maybe I'm replanting this landscape, but the cattle, someone else is turning down the forest to put in the cattle. So at this stage, we look at how likely is there going to be leakage emissions and also reversals from fire, right? Like how prone is the landscape for fire or drought? At this stage, you might not have a full financial model because you really don't necessarily know what activities you're doing. So, but you can get a sense of like, if is my project going to be financially sustainable? And then we also look at the social risk, like are there communities? Who owns the land? Are there indigenous groups? Do they support the project? Do they actually want a project? Do we need to implement FPIC? So those are all the things that you look at a feasibility stage. Here it's just like so that you don't spend tons and tons of money and tons of time working in a project that it turns out not to be feasible. So once you decide that your project is feasible, we move into the project design stage. And to me, this is the most important stage in a project. And it's like, first you need to identify who are the key stakeholders. How are you going to engage them? Who is going to be impacted by the project and who can impact my project? Is the government engaged? Is there customary access on the land? Who do I need to talk to make this project successful? And at this point in time, what we usually recommend is that you do a theory of change. And if you can do that participatory with the identified stakeholders, even better. And a theory of change basically is where you define your activities, your outputs, your outcomes, and the impacts that you're looking for in this purge. Like, what do I have to do now to achieve my goals? And that includes the climate goals, of course, but also the co-benefits. I would recommend that you look at a methodology called the Social and Biodiversity Impact Assessment Methodology. It was designed for RED, but it has a lot of information on how you can make this a participatory process so that you come out with a really strong project design that's actually going to generate the change that needs to happen on the ground. And that is usually involving the people that are going to be impacted. At this stage, you should also define like what are the governance structures? What is the budget that I'm gonna need to carry out the activities? And what is the greenhouse gas program or methodology that we'll be using? Sometimes we explore different methodologies and we run different numbers and we realize, okay, this Vera is better for this. And sometimes gold standard might be better for that. And so I cannot emphasize the importance of this step. Like if you were going to spend money and time on one step, I think this is the one that I would recommend the most. And the more participatory that you do it, the better. So once you have your project designed, you move into implementation. But here I'm going to pass it to Troy to talk a little bit about project finance.
Yeah. So I usually think about project finance in a few different stages. One is, hey, I have an idea, I've gone through some feasibility work, but usually there's a certain amount of money needed to get through the process of registration. That, maybe as a project you have, maybe you don't have it. But regardless, let's say it's a few $100,000, maybe up to $1 million to do some initial project activities, have sort of a pilot site, as well as actually go through the registration process. And some of the costs that are sort of incurred during that time could be the project design, could be pilots, but also is the social safeguards or community engagement process, particularly for conservation projects across large land areas affecting many different communities. That can be more expensive doing, FPIC process trainings in communities. So there are some investors that do this sort of catalytic early stage finance with recoverable grants. But I would say there are not that many. And so this can be one of the hardest stages. If this is not a self-financed activity, this is one of the, I would say, market failures that currently exists. It's actually pretty challenging to go get $500,000 for an early stage project. That's actually one of the reasons why at Earthshot, we're actually starting our own fund to be able to invest in projects and support projects that have not yet achieved sort of or are ready for scale up capital, but are just, need some money to get started and actually get through registration. And in particular, the second stage that I think of is offtake agreement. So once you have an offtake agreement with a big company, and an offtake agreement means a commitment to buy the credits from the project over, 5 or 10 or 30 or more years. That is a big de-risking point. So if you can have a project that is registered on, Vera or Gold Standard or another standard, and you have an offtake agreement, then getting scale-up financing is very doable, if not easy, because nothing I would say is easy in this market, but it is eminently doable. And so I think about three tranches of capital. There's catalytic stage, there's sort of the end buyer or offtake agreement, and the middle stage is often a financial investor or the company itself actually putting into credits for pre-purchase. Often what we there's a few different structures for project finance, particularly for this scale up phase. One is you could have a pre-purchase of credits. This is, a company committing, I'll buy 10 million credits at $10 a credit, and I'll pay you 25% of that today. Another is a carbon streaming deal where there is a commitment to invest, hey, here's $30 million over 5 years to deploy your project activities. And in exchange, I want 30% of the credits every year for the next 40 years. That's a pretty typical structure that we see. Some less common structures include actually just direct equity investments in projects that looks more like venture capital. This is something that has happened in the past, particularly for more mature organizations, but I think is a pretty hard sell for many, many financial institutions. And so we more typically see either debt, credit streaming, or pre-purchase agreements. And though, like, let's say you get $30 million to do a reforestation project, often that will be over a deployment period, let's say 5 or 7 years, and there will be performance benchmarks that you hit, which is like, okay, after year one, I've planted this many trees and I've proven this set of activities. Now I go and unlock the capital for future years. And that's very similar. And I would say if you want to research this a bit more deeply, look at markets for starting power plants or, renewable energy or any other very large infrastructure projects. And it's a very, very similar playbook on how these projects get financed. It's just earlier in the sort of market life cycle. So it's less mature than these other conventional infrastructure classes. But over time, it will look more and more similar, where you have an offtake agreement like a power purchase agreement. You have a scale up financing or like a construction loan for a power plant, and then you have maybe a development revolver or some of this early stage capital needed to get the project started. And I'll hand it back.
Awesome. So once you have all that sorted out, you did your feasibility, now you have an amazing project design, you kind of figure out your financing, then you really go into the action and you start implementing your activities. So there's a few steps here that you really need to make sure that you cover, and these are getting more strict as we go with the standards. Can you put the next one, Troy? So the first one is the stakeholder engagement. And um, like I said, this is getting more and more strict. So you really need to put a lot of emphasis, and these are not cheap activities usually. So as Troy mentioned, you might want to get some money to complete this stakeholder engagement, but you really need to ensure that you have stakeholder participation and that you get free prior and informed consent, especially if you're working with indigenous people or local communities or with customary access rights. This is not a one time process. FPIC is something that you start and it's an ongoing process throughout the whole project lifetime. And you need consent on several things. You need consent on starting project activities. You need consent on the benefit sharing. You need consent to continue project activities. And it might take months. You need to identify who you need to talk to. There's many things you need to do. You need to explain the projects. What are the risks? What are the benefits? So this is a key piece as along with the project design that really needs a lot of thought. You also need to establish a grievance mechanism. If there are concerns with the project, you need to define a benefit sharing agreement, and you need to align with all the safeguards. So this can take several months to complete, and you need to make sure that everything is in place before you can actually go into the certification project. Once you get consent to start project activities, you actually just roll out the activities on the ground. We always recommend that you build local capacity because the more you engage with the people and the more they feel part of a project, I think it's a good outcome for success. And so this might be different for a different type of projects, for a reforestation project, that might mean, building a nursery, getting the seedlings. For a avoided deforestation project, that might mean, hiring the park rangers. When you actually start the project activities, and that they start generating emission reductions and removals, that's gonna define your project start date. And once that milestone is hit, you need to start making sure that you comply with very specific timeframes that the standards set. So, for example, with Vera, once you start the project, you have like 3 years to list it in the registry. So you need to be aware of not only your project activities, and you have to have a management plan and an implementation plan, but what are also the requirements on the standard. The next one, Troy. Um, and then here we have monitoring. So monitoring basically means that you're gonna assess, like the biomass, your carbon stock measurements. Um, a recommendation here that we see often that projects miss is that they think monitoring comes at a later stage. And it does for the carbon, right? Like you wait until the trees grow, or you wait until you can measure remote sensing if there was actual deforestation. But if you have goals that are social in nature or biodiversity, one of the big mistakes that we usually see in projects is that they don't have baseline data to compare it to. So when you do develop the theory of change and you define, okay, these are my impacts, these are my outcomes, these are the defined clear indicators. So I'm going to monitor, for example, income, and I'm going to do this through a household survey. Make sure that you gather the necessarily baseline data information, and that you know which indicators you're going to monitor from the project start date. We see a lot of cases when 3 years into the project, you realize, oh my God, I don't have my baseline data. And so going retroactive is quite intensive and sometimes not even possible. This is also very relevant if you're trying to pursue other standards like the climate, community, and biodiversity standards, where you would require to monitor many things beyond the carbon, like the SDGs, any social indicators, biodiversity indicators. Um, so at this stage, you actually start the monitoring. The monitoring should begin from the project start date. And that's something that goes throughout the project lifetime. This is something that you never stopped doing. And this is what actually goes into your monitoring report. So I'm gonna now pass it to Annika to do another demo.
Great. So we're going to demo our iPhone app Biome that's used just for carbon monitoring. So this is an iPhone app that can help you set inventory plots. Here we're showing an urban example. So you can set the plot center, and that will determine which trees are inside based on your custom plot design. And then we use image segmentation to actually identify the trunk of the tree and LiDAR to measure it. So we'll come up to a tree, and we can measure the two components, DBH and height. So here is showing measuring the height of a tree. You just point at the base and then move to the top of the tree. This is a 3.4-meter tree. Let's go to another tree. So here what we're seeing is the app is looking for the next tree that's inside the plot. And so it can speed up identifying what's in and what's out of a plot. So we'll come over here to the next tree that's inside the plot. And again, we'll point at the tree, and the image segmentation will find the trunk. We can measure it with the LiDAR there. And then there's also the option to add a manual measurement. So if you want to take a measurement with a tape, you can do that, and then you'll be able to run an accuracy assessment at the end. We also have the capability to take multiple measurements for the same tree. So at the end, you can compare and make sure there's consistency across field teams or inventory protocols. So here we're showing taking multiple measurements of the same tree. And so we'll see there's measurement 1, 1.1, 1.2. And then we'll also take the height of this tree. So again, just aim at the bottom of the tree and then come up to the top. And there's the top. So this is a 3.6-meter tree here that we're looking at. And this data is all going to get stored within the app, and then it's organized and ready to download for post-processing. Here we're going to show another tree. So looking again inside the plot, we have the capability to measure multi-stemmed trees as well. So if there's a multi-stem, it will measure each of the stems separately, and then we can apply the correct processing after that. So here we have the LiDAR-based measurement, and then we'll take the height as well. So this is a small tree, go up to the top. It's a 2.5 meter tree, and so that will be recorded automatically within the app. So let's end the plot measurement and view the data. So data from each plot can be downloaded. Biome packages the measurements into a format for seamless integration into downstream processing pipelines and other monitoring platforms like LandOS. So this means that the data you collect in the forest is usable right away for assessments and monitoring. And you could see at the end, in addition to the numerical data, there are images collected for each tree to maintain evidence of the project. So this is still a work in progress, but at its core, Biome helps measure two of the most important attributes for biomass and carbon accounting, the DBH and the height. And we've designed this to be intuitive, easy for field crews to use, and speeding up the pipeline, basically going from monitoring into the downstream processing. I'll pass it back to you, Ceci.
Thank you. So now we're going to talk about certification and what is required. Each standard has its own requirements. We're going to base this discussion more on the Vera standard. For example, the Climate Action Reserve has validation and verification as one step, but we're going to talk about these different pathways because most standards have validation and verification as separate steps. The next one, Troy. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to write a project description document or a project design document. And basically what that document has, it's all of the project information. It can get to a very lengthy document. We're seeing more and more that standards are going to start digitalizing this process, which I think it's a great addition because right now, we have like 200-page document, and when you're all trying to work on it, it gets kind of tricky. Um, a recommendation here is like there is usually a template that you need to fill. Make sure you comply with all the requirements in the template, but a key piece is the supporting documentation that goes into that. So make sure that you have your supporting documentation organized, like the land title, all the minutes from the stakeholder engagement process, and document everything as you go. So as you're doing the stakeholder engagement, how you identify your stakeholders. If that was in a meeting, record it, take pictures, write a report. You're monitoring, like if you're going to use Biome or if you're going to do it manually, what are the standing operating procedures? So all of those supporting documents don't go into the project description document, but are required, and it's very important that you have them from the beginning. Once you have a project description document, what happens is you list it under the selected carbon start. That means that you're going to put it out there for the public to see it. Vera has two ways on you can do this. You can list it as under development, and that basically means that you have a few things already cooked, but you're missing a lot of the stuff. But that way, it's just like setting an intention with the registry that, yeah, I'm gonna, looking forward to develop this project. So here is my initial ideas. It also helps if you're looking for finance to have the project listed, even if it's under development. Once you submit it like under validation, and that means that your project is ready to go undergo the third-party audit, you submit it and then it goes a public comment period, which is anybody can take a look at it. Anybody can submit comments and provide feedback. So I've seen issues where the land tenure is not clear and it's out there for public comment period. And so there are concerns raised at that stage. And then once you have your documentation, it's been listed, you start the validation and registration process. And validation basically means that a third-party auditor is going to come to your project, is going to review all the documentation, including the supporting materials. They're going to go to the site, they're going to talk to people, making sure that what you're saying is true. and they're going to submit a validation report to the registry. And then the registry is going to review the project again. It's going to submit comments to the auditor. Once everything, all the findings are addressed, then the project is actually registered under the standard. And then the next step is actually verification and issuance. Um, you can do validation and verification at the same time. That's up to you. There's preferences. Sometimes our preference is to do it separately because of the validation. During the validation, the auditor is going to review your monitoring plan. And so if you have findings on that, you don't want to have a monitoring report with a monitoring plan that's not accurate. So verification, unlike the validation where you do a project description document, here you do a monitoring report, and you're basically reporting on your monitored data, both on carbon, biodiversity, and social impacts. As with the validation in a verification, you also have a third party validation verification body or VVB that's going to come to your project. They're going to review your documentation. They're going to make sure that what you're saying is true. And then once that's done, they submit a verification report to the registry, and then the registry approves it, and then you can issue credits. And so those are like the steps that we have identified. Like I said, there's a lot of feedback loop between one of the other. Like, for example, you're monitoring activity and you realize that it's not working. Your tree survival is not what you expected, and you need to do tweaks. So you need to always have an adaptive management approach to these projects. And so I just want to wrap it up because in the end, what matters really is the big picture, what you want to accomplish. And you have all these little steps that go in between. But if you're true to your goal and objectives, it might make the process even easier. So that's all that we had today. I know it's a lot and at the same time, very general. Um, but we would love to answer any questions you might have. We can give you examples of the projects that we've worked with, what has worked, where have we learned. So please ask away.
I see a lot of questions in the chat. So Nina has quite a few questions, and thanks for being here, Nina. And one question is around offtake agreements, and what are best practices and challenges we see in what to do and what not to do in offtake agreements? Wow, this is a really deep topic. Right now, there is not an industry standard practice. Offtake agreements actually have not been done that often, and it's become sort of like a new thing. It used to be, hey, there were carbon streaming deals primarily on how credits get transacted, and then there would be spot transactions, so sort of selling on the open market to companies later. And now companies are recognizing, hey, there's a price reason or an access reason to like sort of de-risk the next 30 years of their credit purchases, so they're just signing offtake agreements, but there are no sort of industry standard offtake agreements. Right now, I would say in general, this is like a custom legal process and custom negotiated process. And so we have seen quite a few of these. Off the top of my head, there's not like, okay, I've got the three bullets of what to look out for that are sort of gotchas from big companies buying. I mean, there's price, there's volume, and then I would say there's just like general rigor of the offtake agreement about whether it's bankable or not. I had a great conversation with Greg Adams from Chestnut, and he would actually be an amazing resource to ask specific pointed questions about how to make an offtake agreement bankable versus one that a bank would go take a look at and be like, I understand that it says there's volume and price here, but actually the contractual language is not rigorous enough for us to actually go and back with financing. So this is quite a deep topic. I think that we will start seeing in the next year a standardized set of offtake agreements that are just sort of industry recognized as best practice. So just like renewable energy, once you have a power purchase agreement, like this is a very standardized document, and you can just go to a bank and you go get financing at whatever the credit rate you have. So I think that is that would be a great development that we have not yet seen in this industry.
I think I can try to answer the next two. And so, yeah, we can talk about FPIC a little bit. So there aren't any really strong guidance documentation from the standards on how FPIC needs to be carried out as we speak. Um, this is something that we've worked a lot in the past 3 years because we think it's like a key piece. And I'm talking about stakeholder engagement, free prior and informed consent, ensuring that the safeguards, like you said, like no harm is being done. And I think the standards are getting more and more strict about it, but still haven't been able to provide the needed guidance. And this is one of the places where might stay stuck in an audit process if you didn't do this process properly. And it happens a lot. Like people really don't know how to do the stakeholder engagement process. And so we've been very thorough on how we do it. And we start by really understanding what are the impacts and the risks. How do we engage with people? What level of consent is needed? Because you might need consent to actually start the stakeholder engagement process, right? Like I think many projects just skip through, oh my God, consent means that they're going to sign an agreement with us and they're going to give us the rights to the credits. But to me, it goes much more like than that. Like they really need to understand what the project is. And that just that on itself can get very complicated. Like on telling people what a carbon project is, it's like very hard to explain when you're talking to a community, that they don't know how to read and write, and you're trying to explain like these, uh, like it's the CO2 that goes into the tree. It's a very complicated process, but I think they really need to understand what they're signing into, right? Like, are there things that they're going to have to stop doing? What are the potential risks and impacts? But also the benefits, right? I think this is something that really needs to be discussed early on. So best
Maybe
practice
long
for
story
FPIC.
short, Ceci, on FPIC, like from an investor perspective, this is one of the areas, like you said, you can get stuck in an audit process forever if you haven't done this process correctly. It's also one of the AI proof parts of this industry. It's like you can go do all the monitoring and all the technology and all the automated like remote sensing. There is no way to replace this process. It is going to be a time intensive and communications intensive process. That's not something that a lot of investors want to hear, but that is just the reality of getting one of these projects done, kind of no matter where you are in the world. Some projects are easier than others, but particularly conservation projects or any projects that are, in countries or regions, like with unclear land titles, for example. And so what we recommend is engaging in this process early, getting professional teams to go and actually do this for proper documentation. And that can de-risk if you're thinking about making a $30 million investment in a project, you absolutely want to have this process done right. Um,
Yeah. And then moving to the next one, I think Nina's asking like, what's the difference between an audit and a verification? And I think Brian responded to that already. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about many mishaps to avoid, and we've been through this process quite a few times. My recommendation is try to get the best auditor that you can. Sometimes projects go with a cheaper audit because you've been spending so much money already on your project and you're like, oh my God, I'm not gonna pay that much for an auditor. Let me tell you, sometimes it's worth it because then the auditor does a really good, thorough job before you submit to Vera. So you spend more time early on trying to fix whatever it needs to be fixed. And I think in the end, you might save some time that when the project goes to Vera or to other standards, it's already pretty cooked. So that would be my recommendation. I don't know if I'm allowed to say which BBBs we prefer, but I'll be happy to send a message later on which are my preferred BBBs. The name of the document, I'm guessing that one is related to the social and biodiversity impact assessment for RED. That's one that we use. I hope that's the one we're talking about. Um,
I will say if you have a question, you can also send it afterward if you want additional clarifications. I'm sure someone on the team would be happy to support.
yeah. What has been our experience with stakeholder engagement process in different countries? Um, So we usually work with partners on the ground, and they are the ones that have the relationships on the ground. So what we do is we don't come in and we do the process. We actually build capacity with our partner organizations. They know the people, they've worked there, they know what they're doing, they speak the same language. So what we do is we like, okay, this is what needs to be done, and usually they do it on the way that works best. They know the traditions, the customs, the way things work. These are some things that you really need to consider. Like, are you talking about just one indigenous leader and he has the voice of the community and that's how their government structure works? Or you need to actually talk to individual people and they make decisions collectively. So these are the things that you need to understand before you go in. And usually partners that want to develop a carbon project have been working in the landscape long enough to know these things.
So feel free to type more questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. I see some maybe potential questions in the chat, but put them in the Q&A section if you have specific questions. Otherwise, anything else, Annika, Ceci, while we wait to see if someone else pops in. Maybe just some thoughts for me to close up. Like this is a complicated process. It's not just complex, right? Like there's a lot of steps, but we know the steps. Like you can go through the registration and audit process. It's like doing your taxes. Like you don't have to understand the entire tax code, but there are like professionals you hire and accountants and tax prep, and like you can get through that process. But it's also a moment in the market where the level of rigor and compliance requirements for social safeguards and community benefit sharing, like these have all faced a very, very high level of scrutiny. So what we're seeing is that if you don't do it right the first time, you can get caught in the bardo of registration, and that makes you face existential risk for a project investor. So in addition to all this sort of, hey, it's already hard to get investment. It's already hard to sign a big offtake agreement. You don't want to get stuck in the registration process. And so part of what Earthshot does is, okay, there's a set of technologies, some of which we talked about today, that automate and streamline some of the methodological computations and other things that, you know, math and science and computers can do really well. But there's a whole set of activities that we will never be able to automate, at least within existing regulatory frameworks. And this is where you really need sort of expert assisted services like the FPIC process. Um, you don't need us to go run an FPIC process, but what you do need is a really clear understanding of the level of documentation, the structure of those meetings, like so that you can actually go and pass an audit. And that it's a slightly different thing, and but something I really, really highly recommend when running these projects is like just get the support of an expert to run that because even very, very sophisticated groups that we've seen, like have gone to submit PDs, they get rejected and they basically lose 2 or 3 years of that process and then essentially get into financial trouble because it's just taken so long to get that project registered. And it's sort of like I want to apologize on behalf of the carbon markets that it's so hard, but we're here to like try to make it easier, and it's really the beginning of that journey. Um, yeah. Any other
I
comments?
just want to add that just it is a process that requires a lot of people usually. So in our team, we have a social safeguards specialist, we have a science team, we have a certification team. So don't feel frustrated if you're trying to run it on your own. Usually this is definitely a team process. So just get help from the people that you need to. So it's like I don't think one person alone can do a carbon project. You need a lot of people that know different things to make it work.
Any other final comments, Annika, Ceci, Ben, or any comments from the chat? All right. It's really a pleasure to have you here. I will turn off the recording in a moment and really glad to see so many people that have come to this, and hopefully there are ways to partner. And it's just really a pleasure that so many people are on the same mission as we are to go restore and protect nature, to affect climate action, to, do something good in the time that we're in. It's a good time to stick together, and please reach out. Oh, actually, this is a great question. Your favorite tree slash animal species? Okay, I expect to see at least a few dozen answers in the chat. Favorite tree and animal species. So I live in Northern California, up in the redwoods. So redwoods are amazing. I love redwoods so much. Um, yeah. Anyone else? Annika, Sassy. Ooh, red oaks. I'm going to turn off the recording so you don't have to publicly state your favorite tree if that's too sensitive of information.
Mine is a red alder. I love nitrogen fixers.
A very scientific answer.